Okay, this is the analysis for 4E Pure Geog Paper 2 Mid-Year 2017. For both classes, a total of 29 students enrolled for Pure Geog. For Paper 2, 4E1, 15 passes, 4 distinctions. For 4E2, 11 passes, 1 distinction. So it is not at the level that we expect you to be at. We hope for better grades. The highest score recorded for 4E1 is 42 marks, and for 4E2 it is 36 marks. The lowest recorded for both classes is 24. However, if you score anything below 26, technically you have failed, because this paper is number 1, not very difficult, so you should expect to score above 26. Given this is mid-year, it is not very far below standard. However, you need to continue putting in effort. For the candidates who have scored below 26 or below, you have to put in a lot more effort, because Pure Geog traditionally is a high pass rate, low distinction subject. Okay, for question 1, one of the requirements are basically for you to describe the distribution. Focus on keywords of the direction, for example, north, across to the east, down south, towards which continent. Focus also on the question's requirements, which is convergent as well as divergent plate boundaries. And since the plate names are given, you are expected to list down clearly the plates involved. Take a look at this particular candidate's script for question 1A part 1. There's a mention of basically copying down of the question itself, mentioning that there are about the same amount of convergent as well as divergent plates. There is no specific mention of location, spread or distribution. Therefore, this is a 0 mark answer. This other candidate is doing slightly better. There's specific plates that are mentioned. However, there is no specific mention of what is the flow, what is the distribution of these type of plate boundaries in the map that's shown. So this answer here is also only worth about 2 marks. For 1A part 2, the answer requires you to identify that it's a mid-oceanic ridge. As the name of the plates are clearly given in the map, you are required to name them as well. Description of the formation of such a landform is essential. Use of suitable keywords is required. The example shown here is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. This must be listed in your answer. There is also no need for a diagram in this particular case. However, there are candidates, I think 2 or 3 candidates, who chose to draw a diagram down. You will not be penalized, and if you are able to use the diagram correctly to assist you in your explanation, credit will be given to the diagram itself. So if you can remember the diagrams for any of these landforms, even if they do not ask you specifically to draw one, it is okay to use one. This candidate here correctly identifies that this is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. He gives a brief description of the formation of the ridge. However, there are some errors in the answer itself, using things like melt into the ocean, which is wrong. The candidate also missing key data, which is the plates that are involved in this. Another problem with this candidate is the handwriting is rather untidy and it is on the verge of being beyond. Candidates should refrain from providing handwriting that is in this particular state or worse, because if the examiner is unable to recognize what you have put down as your answer, you will not be credited for the answers that you have put down. And there is actually no way to check whether the examiner actually understands your writing or not. So please do not penalize yourself like this. As you can see here, this other candidate chose to provide a pictorial description of the landform that's being formed at this particular location X here. It has assisted him in filling up some of the gaps in his original description, which is rather brief, and as a result he has been awarded the full 4 marks that is given to this question. So once again, if you do know the diagram, it is fine to draw the diagram down. Moving on to question 1b part 1. The question here requires you to talk about distance from the epicenter, magnitude, depth of focus. Now for time of eruption, for time of earthquake, this isn't a key factor as the time of the earthquake is 11:56 a.m. So generally people will be awake, they will be at work or in school, able to respond. If you mention distance from epicenter, you need to note that you have to specifically mention other locations on the map as contrast, because there is no physical distance given between the distance between the epicenter as well as where Kathmandu actually is. However, if you mention things like depth of earthquake, it being 8.2 kilometers, being shallow depth, it is okay. If you mention magnitude of a 7.8, you also need to link in the type of infrastructure that is present in Kathmandu and why is it that a 7.8 magnitude earthquake is a very serious one for this particular region. For 1b part 2, the question requires you to state, other than causing deaths, 2 impacts that this earthquake may have on Kathmandu. So candidates can choose to focus on damage to economy, spread of diseases, liquefaction. One interesting point that came up is there are several candidates who, instead of talking about liquefaction, focus specifically on landslides. If you choose to specifically focus on landslides and subsequently you mention liquefaction, you will not be given 2 marks. You will not be credited for both points because they are technically under the same sub-point. So you have to mention any 2, damage to economy, spread of diseases, or landslide/liquefaction. For question 1c, the question requires you to take a stand and decide whether the extent of the truth of the statement. Having effective infrastructure development is the most effective measure a country should implement when it comes to preparing for earthquakes. What is required in your answer? Number 1, you have to take a stand. There are still candidates who don't take a very clear stand in this. You have to agree to a large or small extent. Please remember that. Next, you have to explain the given factor. In this case, it is infrastructure development. Provide a clear example of what you understand as infrastructure development. Then you need to give 2 contrast factors. Emergency drills, land use regulations, disaster warning systems. Be logical in your argument, and in your conclusion you have to show that whatever points you have given, either they support your initial stand, either in agreement to a large or to a small extent. This is important as if you don't have a conclusion, you are stuck in level 2, 5 marks. Another core problem notice for this particular paper is for the open-ended questions under the take a stand style of question. Most candidates chose to only give 1 contrast factor. Based on the rubrics that we have analyzed, if you only provide 1 contrast factor, it is technically impossible to move beyond L2 5 marks. Similarly, if you don't provide a conclusion, you will be stuck at the maximum of L2 5. For question 2a part 1, we refer you to the graph that is given. You need to highlight certain things. Number 1, increase in GDP shows an increase in meat consumption. Number 2, a decrease in GDP shows a corresponding decrease in meat consumption. Mention exceptions to this rule. Countries that are away from the norm. Countries like Argentina, Brazil, and Japan. Finally, you must name the countries. There are several candidates who mention LDC and DCs as a condition, and they do not name the countries. The countries' names are clearly provided in figure 3, and so you have a responsibility to correctly and clearly name these countries as your examples in your answer. For 2a part 2, you are required to give reasons to account for the variations in meat consumption shown above. So for this particular part, you need to List down the fact that which countries have increased amount of disposable income and how does that actually factor into meat consumption. You need to highlight the reasons for your exceptions. Religious factors for India, cattle exporters for Brazil and Argentina. Another point that can be brought up is the fact that developed countries, DCs, have better storage systems and networks which allow them to have a larger consumption of meat product. So looking at this particular candidate's answers, this candidate correctly mentions DCs and gives examples of DCs, talks about their high disposable income leading to higher purchasing power, leading to purchasing more meat and eating less of a staple food. However, there's no mention of the reverse, the low disposable income, and there's also no mention of or justification for the religious groups or the countries that have firmer religions like India. For question 2b, the focus is on insufficient food intake, concept of malnutrition, where you have to give the definition as well as provide some long-term effects. Example of diseases that can be resultant of malnutrition, impact on children. Starvation is another concept that has to come across, definition as well as potential impact, and the final point, which is death. Key point to note here, there is no need to mention anorexia or bulimia. However, there are many candidates who actually put that in as part of the answer, hence rendering the answer invalid. So please read the question very carefully and only focus on providing parts that you have studied pertaining to the question itself. Do not dump whatever you memorize down. Just because it's under the same factor, same topic, it doesn't mean it's applicable. For 2C, the 3 points can come from any of these 6 factors listed here: poverty, lack of storage, extreme weather conditions, pests, civil strife, and poor governance. You need to take a good look at the picture and identify that this place, this market here, doesn't have a lot of food. You also need to figure out that this is Mali in Africa. So when mentioning things like extreme weather conditions, you should not mention floods. Mali, the extreme weather condition related to a place like Mali in Africa is drought. Please remember that information given in the question is to be applied to the answer itself. Do not just randomly, I repeat, do not just randomly throw down whatever you think you've memorized. It doesn't work. For the last question, open-ended, once again, there's a limitation to this particular one. For logic reasoning, you can only agree to a small extent. However, there are several students who either agree to a large extent or choose to disagree with it totally. Please try and very hard to stick to the prescribed format, as that allows you to have a scaffold to build your answers into something that can hit level 3. Now, for this question, the first thing you need to do is you need to explain obesity. What exactly is it? How do you achieve obesity? And what is the link on DCs and obesity? Following that, you need to, as part of your first contrast factor, show that there are LDC countries that have a portion of the people who suffer from obesity as well. However, the quantity being small has to be highlighted. Case example can be of China, where you have a small group of very rich people who are living DC lifestyles within the LDC itself. Following that, you need to show once again the pervasiveness of LDC obesity, that it is not a big amount of people, not a big proportion of the population. Another point that needs to be brought across is the impact of work or exercise. So another counterpoint that can be brought into as a second contrast factor is the impact of work, type of work in DCs and LDCs, and as a result, why is it that people living in DCs doing white collar jobs tend to suffer from obesity at a higher rate than LDC workers who are working blue collar jobs. One final point, this concept of increased eating, decreasing in the work rate or exercise, leading to obesity must be brought across, because that is the true cause of obesity. Is not only the fact that they eat more, but the fact that the exercise rate or the work rate doesn't account for burning away the excess amount that they're eating. From a logic standpoint, it is important to recognize that there is a limit to how much you can eat before you kill yourself eating. So the human body will not allow yourself to overeat to the point where you die. As a result, to suffer from obesity is a prolonged process. It is an ordeal that you have to torture yourself with repeatedly by not only gorging yourself, but restricting the amount of work that you do. That's all for the analysis for Paper 2 Pure Geog Mid-Year 2017. Candidates who have done well, please keep up the effort. You have got one final school exam to go, which is your prelims, after which is the actual paper that you'll be sitting for. So there is still some time as we move forward and finish up syllabus and proceed to the revision phase. You need to recognize that effort, consistent effort, is a must from this moment onwards. Finally, for those of you who have not done well enough this round, there is still time. It is, however, time to start. Start working hard for all your subjects. Your CCAs have concluded. There is no more excuse. So please start working hard now. I would like to remind you, last batch we had no distinction for Pure Geog.